The producer of Ethel and Ernest, Camilla Deacon.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much to everybody who stayed through those very long credits. As you can see, an awful lot of people worked on the film, so we had to fit a lot of names in. But also, I hope you enjoyed the song by Paul McCartney, which he very kindly wrote especially for us. And following that was a jazz song, which was actually written by his father, James McCartney. And so the little Easter egg referred to at the beginning was actually that when Ernest takes Ethel on their first date and they leave the cinema, they walk past the ballroom and some posh people are getting out of a car to go in, and they hear a jazz band playing inside, and there's a sign which says Jim Mack's Jazz Band, and that's the name of Paul McCartney's father's band. And so we were very lucky to meet Paul McCartney, and he and Raymond got on really well. And we were talking to him about music of the period, and he said my dad was in a band and played. So we asked if we could use some of his dad's music as well, and he very kindly said yes. So we re-recorded it with in the session we did with Carl Davis, who did the score, and so I think it came out quite well. So that's the only version of that song played with authentic jazz instruments. There is one other that Paul McCartney recorded, but anyway, so that was a rather nice touch that we were very glad that he allowed us to use that. But there was one other little detail which I don't know if you noticed, but I was very interested in watching The Snow Girl, the short film before Ethel and Ernest, because of course the book and the film that Raymond Briggs is most famous for is called The Snowman. And it's really a huge film in Great Britain. It's on every Christmas, and it's watched by millions of people every year. And in fact, in 2012, we made a sequel called The Snowman and the Snow Dog. But you'll notice that Raymond was drinking out of a snowman teacup at the beginning. And then later on, obviously, when he's evacuated down to the countryside and his auntie is making a cake, he's doing a drawing of a snowman. So it was a little nod to his most famous work. So I think it was very clever of the programmers to put our two films together. Very, very smart. But it's a real honor to be here. Thank you very much. And it's lovely to hear the audience reactions. You laughed a lot. I think some people enjoyed the one yank and they're down joke. But oh, I know it's a very moving film, and it makes me cry every time I see it, and I've seen it a lot. But interestingly, Raymond is always in floods of tears watching it. And one of the things that was really lovely was that he came to the voice recording with Jim Broadbent and Brenda Blethyn. And he loved what they did. He thought it was amazing. And it's not an easy thing as an actor to play someone's parents while they're actually in the room with you, but they did a great job. And he asked for a box of tissues, and I thought at first maybe he had a bad cold, a heavy cold. Just kept blowing his nose. And then, of course, I twigged, he was crying. And he was really in floods of tears by the end of the session, but he said it actually was lovely for him because it was like having his parents back. He said he kept turning around thinking his dad was in the room with him. It was really a nice feeling for him, even though it was very emotional. Anyway, please feel free to ask some questions.
So do we have any questions from the audience? Yes. The question is, why was the film made in an animated form?
Thank you. Well, all Raymond's books are illustrated. He's famous for being an author and an illustrator, and this is based on a graphic novel. And so he's told his parents' life story in pictures, and so we wanted to bring it to life, bring the drawings in his book to life, if you like. So I don't think he'd have allowed it to be made as a live-action movie with actors. I think he would have felt that would be odd, but because we were as far as possible, we were very faithful to his original designs, and we wanted to make sure that all the detail that he puts into his books were also in the film, and so in the end he was very happy with the end result.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Do you know what? Brenda was an absolutely brilliant actress, and she brought so much to the role because she said it was very reminiscent of her own upbringing. She said it really was just like her own mum and dad. She said her dad would always be there in the kitchen with his head in the newspaper, pontificating about politics, and while her mum was always working. I don't know if you noticed that, Ethel never sat down. She's always ironing, cleaning, washing. Meanwhile, Ernest is reading the paper. So she said it was just like her mum and dad, and in fact, her parents had similar jobs. You know, her mother was in service when she was young, and her dad wasn't a milkman, but he was a delivery driver. So they're very, very similar. And she came from a family, I think Ethel was one of 11, and I think Brenda's one of 13 or something. Or maybe, anyway, very similar family background. Grew up in a 2-up, 2-down terraced house. Thank you. Well, it was quite tricky because it doesn't have a traditional narrative arc like a lot of films, you know, because it's somebody's real life, so you have to be true to that. And, you know, we had a lot of debate about how much historical detail to put in. There are a few things that are in the book that aren't in the film, and a few things in the film that aren't in the book. So I think really Roger, the director, he adapted the screenplay from the book. He did an amazing job. But I think another answer to an earlier question about why animate it is, of course, if you show somebody in the 1920s all the way through to the 1970s, it's quite hard to do that with real actors. Whereas, of course, if you're drawing them, you can age them over time, and it feels more natural.
Yes. The question is, how long did the cat live?
Do you know, I was waiting for the cat question. I even said beforehand, didn't I, we'll get the cat question. It's a lovely question, thank you, and we often have it at screenings. And the fact of the matter is that they had a succession of different cats, but they gave them all the same name. So they had Susie Puss, right the way through, but every time one Susie passed away, they'd get another black cat and call her Susie.
Yes, sir. So the question is, what was more of Raymond Briggs's role in contributing to the film?
Well, Raymond was executive producer on the film. You probably saw that little picture of him in his school uniform at the end. This is the first time he's been actively involved in a film based on one of his books. Before that, he's given his permission, but he hasn't been actively involved in the production. And in fact, when the book first came out, he didn't want it to be made into a film, and it was only many years later that he agreed. And I think that's partly because we had a good relationship with him. We'd worked with him before. And John Coates, who had originally optioned the book, had worked with him on The Snowman and Father Christmas and many other films with him. He wanted to be involved in the script and to make sure that the details were right, and to make sure that, you know, it was true to the story that he was trying to tell about his parents. And actually, Roger Mainwood, the director, had a very good relationship with Raymond and would go down to see him a lot. And Raymond lives in the house in Sussex that you saw in the film, the one that his mum said was a dump. He still lives there now. He had input into little details. You know, the dialogue had to be right. And of course, it's very useful to have that input, because we wouldn't necessarily know how people, you know, would have spoken in the 1930s, but of course he had an ear for it, so, and he would remember exactly, so he could correct things in the script. And yeah, he was very involved. You know, he liked detail as well. He's an artist, so he'd say, you need another button on that jacket, or you know, the mangle. He was very keen to tell us about the mangle, because we'd taken a photograph of a mangle, and he said, no, that's not the right mangle, and you know, the material doesn't go in that way, it goes in this way. So we had to get all the technical stuff right. But luckily, animators by their very nature are kind of obsessive compulsive people anyway, so they, you know, Roger and Robin, our art director, they love all that sort of thing, so they spend a lot of time researching, you know, the exact light switches you'd have had in a 1920s house, or you know, the style of light fittings, or you know, all of those little details, what type of lighter. So Ernest has a lighter which is pre-Zippo. You know, I mean, you're probably familiar with Zippo lighters, because I think they're American. But you know, well, I don't know where they're from, but you know, little things like that. So that was really nice to have his input on that. And we even got the sound effects as accurate as possible. So One thing we did, we recorded a Lambretta of the same year, Triumph Herald, all the cars, we re-recorded them. And our editor, Richard, his brother has the most amazing job. He restores Spitfires for a living. So we went to Duxford Air Museum, and they fired up a Spitfire and flew it for us so we could record that audio for the planes taking off.
So I was actually asked a question that I promised I would ask you. Last night, those of you who were at our 7 o'clock movie last night, you remember our actresses Shane Bruce and Christy Bruce that were here on our stage. Christy loves this film. She saw it in England, and she was so mad that she was going to be gone and wouldn't be able to see it here. Her mother had not seen it yet, and they said, find out, is it going to come out on a DVD? When can we see it again?
Well, we're really hoping that it's going to come out in the States soon. We're talking to various people over here about making that happen. I can't give you any dates, but do look out for it, because I'm sure it will be available on DVD and or on SVOD channel very soon. So hopefully I can let you guys know, and maybe you can put it on your, well, maybe not, you're not allowed to promote things like that, but we'll try and do some publicity around it. If you want to know any more actually about that kind of thing, we do have a very good website, which is www.ethelandernest.com, and there's also quite a nice blog which the director Roger started, which has a lot of information about when we were making the film.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, unfortunately, it's a very sad story. His wife died the year after his parents died. Yeah, she, as well as the schizophrenia, she also she developed leukemia, and so poor Raymond, he had a terrible, terrible time in the early 1970s, and he said he was going through a very dark period of his life. And in fact, one of the reasons he wrote The Snowman was because he wanted to write something that was sort of bright and light and had joy in it. Although in The Snowman, of course, the snowman melts at the end, just like in The Snow Girls. So it is a kind of meditation on love and loss, and it became his most successful book.
So we have time for just a few more questions. Ma'am, I believe you had a question.
No, he didn't. No. And it's funny because he's one of the UK's best-selling children's authors. He has got some stepchildren. His second relationship, they never married, but his partner, Liz, has children, and they're in his life, so he has a relationship with them. But he never had his own children. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Camilla Deacon.
Thank you very, very much.